Well, and then I'll have some very specific things to say. The most important thing I have to say is thank you so much, Radwan. I mean, this has just been a phenomenally lucid, compelling, interesting, and important set of presentations. I'm glad you asked me to speak so that I was sure to listen because I have just learned so much already. I do want to respond immediately to Shadi in this sense. Don't be too offended by the Biden administration's lack of attention to or priority on defending democracy and democratic struggles in the Middle East. Because if you look carefully at the other parts of the world, frankly, it has fallen short in many regions of the world, not just the Middle East. There is a deeply, alarmingly authoritarian drift in India. President Biden is meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's presiding over, a degree of religious chauvinism, extremism, and punishment of the Muslim minority and other religious minorities in India. And the Muslim minority constitutes one of the largest Muslim populations of any country in the world. And I predict you're going to hear not a peep of public and probably little in the way of private expression of concern about India's drift away from democracy and any kind of respect for religious and other minority rights, including academic freedom, the rights of political opposition, and so on. You just had Ferdinand Marcos Jr. elected president of the Philippines. The whole ASEAN region has been tilting away from democracy. Can you recall hearing much Biden administration declaration of concern about that? I don't see this as Middle East exceptionalism. I see this as a very big gap between the lofty goals and principles of a vague and ill-defined democracy summit process and the hard realities of diplomacy, which have gotten, of course, a lot harder since Russia invaded Ukraine, and our political capital has shrunk because, like our military, literally our military inventories, we need to use so much of it in this critical battle. So I share your moral concern and the one in this panel that there should be no Middle East exceptionalism, that our goal should be the defense of human rights and the advance of democracy for all peoples everywhere in the world. But the Middle East is not the only region that's disappointed. Let's put it that way. I think Tunisia within the MENA region is just absolutely critical. There are very few countries in the world, if any, that have a strategic importance for the future of democracy so out of proportion to their population size. I'd say the one other I could think of is Taiwan, which is a threatened democracy externally, not internally. But it is the country that's got the best chance of being a democracy and a real democracy with significant liberal elements. This coup didn't need to happen. And the first substantive point I want to make about Tunisia itself is this should have been declared a coup a long time ago. And what Sarah said, which is what I thought was the case last year, but then everyone was saying, well, we declared a coup and it triggers automatic aid cutoffs, underscores why we shouldn't have had any hesitation about doing it, as, maybe not in the week after, but as his intentions became clearer and clearer. And I think by late 2021, they were pretty clear. precisely because it doesn't, that the law refers to military coups. I think the moral and geopolitical importance of declaring it a coup really generated an imperative here for the United States. First of all, I forget who said it, but I think it was Sharon, maybe it was Sarah, that there's a demonstration impact, there's a signaling impact within the society that it was Sharon, it does, it does help to undermine the legitimacy of the actor who has staged the coup if you call out in very clear terms what he has done and where he is going. And secondly, if we don't do it here, what does it mean for our credibility in potentially calling a spade elsewhere in the world and acting to reverse democratic regression elsewhere in the world? We are in a very deep and accelerating, I won't even call it democratic recession anymore, severe near depression of democracy in the world. We're on the cusp of a third reverse wave of democratic failures. And if in the face of something that is now becoming so blatant in terms of what Kais Saied is doing to dismantle democratic institutions, we can't even clearly declare what has happened, I think this is going to have extremely significant and harmful effects for our credibility as an international actor defending against democratic reversals. Now, let me say a few things about what I think we should do. And I'm not sure that the distance between Sarah and Sharon and by extension then Shadi perhaps is as great as it may have sounded, because the cutoff of aid, of government to government aid, that's a pretty serious thing. And I think the idea of conditioning, which it has to be conditioned. It's very clear that you have to, meet certain democratic standards to receive Millennium Challenge account assistance. So that's not even, that's just taking the spirit of the Millennium Challenge account seriously to put that as an explicit guidepost for going ahead with a major Millennium Challenge account compact with Tunisia. And I agree as well that when you make this conditioning public, it has a signaling effect that is very healthy and very important. So I actually think, my heart, is with what Sharon said. I'm really outraged by what Saeed has done and is doing. But I think the idea of just taking the whole block of existing assistance and moving it, redirecting it to civil society is an extremely clever idea. And I don't know what proportion of that aid is now directed toward small and medium enterprises in Tunisia, but I would put a lot of emphasis on that. It seems to me that you can really reach down into Tunisian society and help to jumpstart a new kind of economy if we could make a long-term commitment toward cultivating, training, and perhaps with small lending that, some kind of new vehicle for that could be directed towards small and medium enterprises in Tunisia. And all these ways signal that we feel a long-term stake in Tunisia, and with the Tunisian people. Our goal should be to separate the regime from the people and to signal our long-term solidarity with the Tunisian people. Let me say as well, private diplomacy, yes, is, I think, counterproductive when it's just carrots, it's just beseeching, it's just wishing and hoping. But when it's carrots and sticks, it's not just being nice to them. The goal of private diplomacy can be and should be to manipulate their cost benefit analysis. And here, I would send a high level envoy to Saeed, someone who clearly is carrying the full moral and geopolitical authority of the President of the United States. If that person could be accompanied by someone from the EU or an EU partner, even better, but the lift in doing what I'm about to do for the EU would be stronger, would be a more substantial lift. But I think we should lay out to Saeed everything we're willing to do to help and elevate Tunisia and make him a successful president for the remainder of his term. Maybe even will help him get reelected again if he does specific democratic things. And high among them is not only holding a free and fair election, but there simply has to be a credible and independent electoral administration if there's going to be a free and fair election, but also making very clear to him what's going to happen if he goes down the current path. And I think part of what needs to be said about what's going to happen if he goes down the current path is a very specific list of targeted sanctions, financial sanctions, personal sanctions on travel and so on, that's going to come down on him and the Tunisian elites supporting him if he goes ahead to institutionalize this authoritarian coup. I've got two last points. Number one, actually, Sarah, you are not correct that constitutional referendums always win. That is simply not true. The defeat of Pinochet's authoritarian constitution in a referendum was a major landmark decision that triggered a transition back to democracy. And there was, at least I think it was in Bolivia, another recent instance where an authoritarian populist tried to foist a new constitution on the society and lost. But there's a crucial condition for success, and that is people have to participate. And I think we should urge our interlocutors and partners in Tunisian civil society to not boycott the constitutional referendum. They can go in saying, look, we think this is, the ground rules are not free and fair. We go in protesting, but election boycotts almost always fail. And that's a more general proposition that I would make. And then try and get as much monitoring of the process as possible. But massive mobilization for a no vote in the referendum, I think, should be what we encourage. And then finally, I think there is another way of doing deliberation that could make a difference. And that is, we've been doing deliberative polls at Stanford University in lots of countries around the world. And I think that if you just bring a random sample of Tunisians together to deliberate on the country's plight and different constitutional options and inform them in advance in a neutral and fair way about the costs and benefits of different constitutional options, that could be a way of getting a public deliberation in Tunisia that would actually be very democratic. And you could even, do it online, so people could deliberate using their mobile phones or something like that. That's all.